This is a bag of gems. There's just some assembly required. Seriously, this is aluminum oxide powder and each grain is a tiny little sapphire. And if I could just get them combined into one big crystal, it would be a beautiful gemstone. And better yet, if I add some of this green chromium oxide, it would turn it red, making it a ruby. I've wanted to make my own gems as long as I can remember, and it kind of sounds like it should be simple. But it turns out to be really difficult to get from here to here. But I can already hear you typing in the comments section. This isn't difficult at all. Styropyro did it with a handheld laser.
Styropyro grew his own rubies using a high-powered laser.
Oh, hey Drake, could I borrow your laser?
Sure.
So yeah, it turns out if you just shoot the powder with a powerful laser, you can instantly melt it and make a beautiful bead of ruby in about 2 seconds. It's red, it's fluorescent, it's hard and durable, it's real ruby. So, job done and subscribe to Styropyro, right? Well, not quite. This ruby bead is gorgeous, but I can't help noticing that it's opaque. And under the microscope, we can see this isn't a single crystal of ruby. It's actually a hollow geode made of thousands and thousands of interlocking crystals. I don't need a giant crystal to be satisfied, but it doesn't count if it's too small. So I want to grow a ruby big enough to cut a 1-carat gem that you could set in a ring, around 10 millimeters. And there are better ways to make melted ruby crystallize. The simplest is the flame fusion method from the 1800s. Just drop the powder through a hot torch where it melts and have it drip down onto a seed crystal below. Each drop crystallizes onto the seed, growing it bigger and bigger, though these crystals do tend to be of lower quality. For more demanding applications like lasers, you can also melt an entire crucible of ruby powder, dip in a seed crystal, and slowly twist and pull. The melt sticks to the seed, cools, and forms one large crystal of much higher quality, which is known as the Czochralski method. But that isn't any help to me because I just can't do any of these melt methods at home. Outside of a dedicated lab, they tend to be dangerous, complicated, and really expensive. But there is a way I can grow rubies at home, the Flux method. This one is just like making rock candy. Instead of trying to melt the ruby, you dissolve it. Not in water, but in a molten oxide or salt. Once it's dissolved, you can boil off or cool the solution to force the ruby to crystallize as beautiful gems. And best of all, it can be done at temperatures a standard home pottery kiln can reach. You just need the right solvent and the right crucible to contain it. So I cracked open a book and I quickly found a very easy way to do it. Using a mixture of lead oxide and boric acid in a platinum crucible, you can grow big rubies in a week. But there are a couple problems with this. First, I want this project to be super fun, not super fund, so I'm not going to fumigate my garage with lead. The best alternative is molybdenum oxide, which is much safer but tends to evaporate out really quickly. These papers only showed off very small rubies, but I just hoped I could improve on that. The platinum crucible was another problem. They're very expensive and I didn't have one. What I did have was a graphite crucible, which is cheap and non-reactive as long as you keep oxygen away from it. So I just took some molybdenum oxide, some chromium oxide, and some aluminum oxide, mixed them together, and pressed them in. I packed the whole thing in charcoal to scavenge oxygen and set it to cooking. And a couple of days later, I got a black crust. It turns out the charcoal also scavenged the oxygen right off of the molybdenum oxide, reducing it to molybdenum metal and leaving me with no rubies at all. So next I tried what I thought was an alumina crucible. Alumina is just more sapphire, and it should contain the flux long enough to grow rubies in it. This came out weird with a mixture of bladed crystals, but the blacklight revealed there were rubies hiding in there, and under the microscope I could spot tiny, platy crystals a 1/4 millimeter across. But that wasn't all I saw. I also saw these weird balls, which looked suspiciously like cristobalite, a high-temperature form of silica. But there shouldn't be any silica in here. That would poison the reaction entirely, and I would only get some very tiny ruby. Oh. Yeah, this was a dumb mistake. These are actually alumina-based ceramic crucibles mixed with silica. And where there's silica present, you can't form big rubies. The two oxides would much rather make compounds together, to the point that that's just kind of what most of Earth's crust is made of. So I paid a bit more and got some real alumina crucibles. And for the first time, I grew rubies big enough to see by eye. I was ecstatic to see these, but my happiness was short-lived. Sure, there were rubies up to 1 millimeter long, but they only formed at the edges of the crucible. Under the surface, there was just an opaque ruby lump. It seems that since the crucible is made up of tiny crystals of sapphire, the ruby just wants to grow everywhere all at once. So it was back to eBay to look for alternatives. I tried a magnesium oxide crucible, but the flux dissolved so much of it that I got crystals of the gem spinel, which is magnesium aluminate, instead of ruby. And also somehow a bunch of them came out blue, which is really weird. I also made a crucible from a single solid sapphire crystal, which was really cool and grew a crust of ruby on the edge, but it didn't really feel like I could grow single crystals this way. I'm sure I'll be revisiting that for future experiments though. I finally settled on zirconia crucibles, a ceramic made from cubic zirconia just like is used to imitate diamond. This stuff is heat resistant and doesn't react with alumina, so even though the flux dissolves it a bit, it shouldn't prevent rubies from forming. And suddenly I had some real success. This one grew a ton of beautiful rubies alongside gorgeous green crystals of cubic zirconia. I was over the moon and bought a bunch more crucibles, trying to run as many experiments as I could to get them bigger, but I slowly came to a horrible realization. Every single one of these crucibles was cracking and spilling the flux before the crystals could get big. Every single time. This pile of broken crucibles was getting expensive too, and quotes from higher quality suppliers were 5 to 10 times as much. So, since it was clear I'd have to spend a fortune either way, I finally gave in and bought a couple platinum crucibles, lightly used. And speaking of expenses, this video is sponsored by me. My brother and I sell the coolest scientific gems on gemsofscience.com. Things like laser alexandrites, hyperfluorescent scintillator garnets, and much, much more. Your support is the only reason I've been able to afford this project. Now let's get back to it. So I packed the platinum crucible, started a new run with the same parameters, held my breath, and first try I got crystals twice as big as my best run, well formed and with even better clarity. And best of all, I could remove them from the crucible and then just start another run. For the next one, I decided to try a higher temperature, which I'd been afraid to do before, and this grew even bigger rubies. I was officially in love. But now it was time to start improving the flux. The molybdenum oxide evaporates so fast, the rubies just can't get that big. But there are a few additives that can help. So for this next run, I decided to add lithium carbonate to one crucible and a mix of sodium molybdate and tungsten oxide in the other. Unfortunately, I didn't find any specific recipe, so I just sort of added a random amount of each. The sodium tungsten mix formed some beautiful crystals of its own, but didn't make any rubies. And the lithium carbonate, well, it didn't grow any rubies, and it also turns out if you get the ratio wrong, it expands a ton as it cools. I'm really glad this didn't manage to burst because that would have ruined my day. But I tried again using much less of each reagent, and holy cow, the lithium mix came out great, with clear, beautiful rubies, setting a new record for size that the sodium tungstate mix immediately broke. These crystals weren't just bigger, they also had a totally different crystal form. These hexagonal bipyramids that look a lot like how sapphires form in nature, and which are often called a dogtooth. They also had a dark core, which could have either been from contamination or from growing too fast and absorbing too much chromium. So I ordered some higher quality tungsten oxide, and while I was waiting, I tried to do another lithium carbonate run. But a breaker tripped and stopped the run early, so I just added more flux and more ruby and started it again. And when it was done, I opened the crucible to find by far the biggest crystals I had ever grown. These things were massive in comparison, up to 6 millimeters with excellent clarity and crystal form and almost a carat in weight. So now I just had to figure out why. But I actually think I know what happened. These are some model crystals I grew in a research project between college and grad school. If you hold them at a constant temperature, they tend to get a bit bigger. But if you start moving the temperature up and down, something amazing happens. Small crystals shrink and big crystals grow, until you only have a few big crystals left at the end. I was going to try some sort of cycling eventually, but now I think it's the key to the whole thing. But first, I needed to see if I could replicate the results. So I started a new run, cut it off after a day, then added more reagent just like before, and ran it all the way through. And again, I got these big crystals. At least I did in one crucible. The other one didn't have any crystals showing at the top. So I filled them up again and did a longer, even slower run. It was hard to wait almost a week for the results, but when I opened the crucibles, I was glad I did. Both had much bigger rubies immediately visible on top, with a rich red color, sharp faces, and perfect clarity. And under the surface, there were even more. This produced 5 crystals, each over a carat, big enough to set directly in jewelry, but not quite big enough to declare victory. The largest is 8 millimeters long, but it's flat and couldn't really be faceted into a reasonable gemstone. So I figured I had my formula, I just needed to do it more. This time I loaded one crucible with ruby mix, but the other I decided to do something different. I recently got this silver play button, thank you so much to everyone who subscribed, and I thought it would be fun to see what color it would give. So I grated a bit off the edge, mixed it in, and set it to cooking. These I didn't stop at 2 cycles, I went for 5, watching as the rubies grew bigger and the play button run kind of grew and shrank. In the 5th cycle, both of my kilns lost elements partway through, so I decided it was time to call it quits and see what I had. First up, the play button sapphires completely shocked me with a mixture of blue and violet colors. I thought the play button was zinc with a little nickel, so I was expecting maybe yellow, but there must have been traces of iron and titanium in it. Now, unfortunately, they didn't grow super big, but I absolutely love how they came out. Not bad at all for being made from a plaque. But this messed up crucible really came through for me. The rubies are huge, with the largest one weighing it at almost 5 carats and measuring just over 10 millimeters, with the next biggest not much further behind. Plus, there were several decently sized ones below the surface, and I can't believe how good they look. I like the crystal as is, but the project isn't complete until I cut it into a finished gem. So after over a year of work and experimentation, let's finally get it on the DOP and start cutting. I think this is the most nervous I've ever been faceting a stone. I had to keep reminding myself that if something goes horribly wrong, I can always grow another one. The pavilion went really well, but it was the crown that worried me most. The crystal captured a few pockets of the flux as it grew, and one of them broke through to the surface here. But all I could do was put in a little super glue to protect it and get back to cutting. The crown facets all went great, but as I'd feared, after polishing there are a couple visible spots on the table. But hey, it is what it is, so let's get it off the DOP and see what we've got. It's not perfect, but I'm really happy with it. A real gemstone I grew in my garage and cut on a machine that I designed and assembled. And the final weight is 2.2 carats, over twice my goal. It's hard to believe after a year of work and a lifetime of dreaming, but I feel like I can finally declare victory. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to stop, of course. I want to develop the process so I can grow more and bigger rubies. But right now I need to pivot because I have a secret crystal project I'm working on with Styropyro, based on some of the other powders we shot with his laser. And of course I'm keeping the biggest ones, but I have put a bunch up for sale on the website. You can check those out at gemsofscience.com. And I want to thank all of you again. I've wanted to do this all of my life, but without your support, I never could have done it.